Boom, and we're in. Welcome everybody to Escaping the Echo Chamber podcast with me and my ever-present celebrity people and talent co-host, Matthias. Look, I say this not in jest, but the fact that highly decorated individuals. So from my point of view, it's a real pleasure always to be co-hosting with him. And we have the great pleasure of inviting onto the podcast and our guest for this week, Marie Krebs. Welcome, Marie.
Hello.
Yes. So what do we try to achieve on Escaping the Echo Chamber podcast, Matthias? Come on, set it up a little bit. What are we trying to do here?
We try to escape echo chambers. And for people who are not familiar with the term, it's literally get out of your bubble, get out of what people tell you or big corporations tell you with huge marketing budgets to say, look, HR needs to change this way, or we need to rethink the whole space. I think for us, it's really important that we give experts, people that really have done the job, practitioners, really a voice in really sharing their perspective on topics, and also give other people who listen in maybe a different perspective, an idea around how they should have tackled or could have tackled certain topics, and give them some leeway and share some insights about our expertise as well, so that this is a thoughtful conversation, but also really getting to the nitty gritty insights as well of our guests as well, to try to understand how they have done it exactly and what was actually the value add that they created. And so, this is really why we're here for.
This is why we're here. So with that, Marie, just give us a quick introduction about yourself, and then we'll kind of set up the premise for the conversation.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me.
No brainer. When we met at PX Espresso, I was like, yes. Not only we bonded by color and fashion, but absolutely energy as well.
Absolutely. So, who did you invite today? I landed in startups by accident, like many people did, and I discovered a whole world of innovation, which I sunk my teeth into. I was like, I had no idea that existed. In my upbringing, I thought that the only jobs that I could have access to were Playmobil jobs. So very visible things like nurse, firefighter, that kind of job. And when I discovered the sort of back-end B2B world of innovation, the geek in me was like, oof, we're not letting go of that. So I landed at Learnably, which back then was a VC-backed, 10 people big startup in the L&D space. And I then positioned myself for the first people role there. And I had no idea what was expected of me or how I should go about it. So I was thrilled, and what I did is I turned to mentors, to the people in the company who were, the majority of them were product people, Freudian slip, product people, engineers, customer success, customer support profiles. And I also thought, I can't be the only one going through this struggle. So I turned to our community and brought people together in a shared space where lone, more junior side of life people could share and learn from each other. Because if I know how to do one thing, and you know how to do one thing, together we know how to do two things, and that's already 100% more. So
love
that was my first role, setting up the Employee Experience Foundations as we grew from 10 to about 60, gearing up for Series A. I then moved into a crypto company for a short while crypto.
Yeah.
So because I wanted to learn from, as I was the only people person, I wanted to learn from someone who had more experience. So I joined to learn from a brilliant VP there. and then moved back to Learnably, which was not planned, because in the meantime, they'd hired a brilliant head of people. And when I had my first conversation with her, I was like, there's no way I'm not learning from this woman. In that role, we raised Series A successfully and focused a lot on performance, which we'll speak more about in a minute. And that's where I specialized in agile people product methodologies, more formally than just asking product people for feedback. My next role was I stepped up to lead the people experience design team in a gaming studio that was Series C, raised Series D. Headcount was about 350 to 450 for context. And that's my career in a nutshell. So yeah.
Amazing. And I think just that sets up this conversation really well, because it's the third in the PX series, the People Experience series. And we've spoken to Sunita, we've spoken to Luke, and we were really keen to speak to you because actually through the thread through each conversation, as we've kind of got as a group and as an audience got to grips with what is people experience, what does it mean, how can it look to kind of shape and change perhaps the kind of employer landscape. What we wanted to kind of really zone in on, and with this conversation, which you're perfect for, is just really about projects that you can start with, and certainly in your experience, how you've kind of started on these projects. Because I often find, and Matthias, kind of dive in here as well. It's when anything's new, so AI, people experience, when anything's new, I often find the most challenging part is starting. Where do we start? What do we do? What do we start with? And so actually having some examples of that from your experience, I think will be really valuable for everybody listening and watching.
I hope so.
So I don't doubt it will be valuable. And I think what I'd like to start with is just that project at kind of Learnably around performance. If you can just kind of set the context for us, and then we can kind of delve into it a little bit more, because I think that for me was a really interesting one. It piqued my interest immediately.
Sure. Sorry for the beeps in the background. I've just closed that tab.
Can't hear anything. You're all good.
So performance at Learnably. Yeah. Okay. So the context was I joined when we were about, if I remember correctly, about 50 or 60, and in that year that I'll tell you about, grew to 80. We just raised Series A, and we were gearing up for raising Series B, and so performance was a strong focus. And before I get into how we, the define, design, deliver aspect of things, there's a caveat that I'm really keen to share, which is before we even think about the methodology and people experience as a product, the first tip that I'll give to anyone who's interested in doing this is look at your business goals first before thinking about how we're going to do a project. The most important thing is, are we focusing on the right problem, the most important problem? And is the project that we're going to invest time and energy into going to solve the most important problem? Because we can use any methodology in the world. If we're not focused on the right problem that's going to help our business scale and grow revenue sustainably, then it's not going to deliver impact. And ultimately, that's what we're here to do. So, with that caveat shared, the define phase for performance at Learnably, the context, the business context, is that our head of people had organizational design conversations with the leadership team. And what emerged from that, once they agreed on what roles need to be where, was that we had no visibility over performance. How were people performing in their roles? And to prepare for Series B and to reach business objectives, we needed to drive performance. And in order to do that,
definitely, yeah,
the first step,
100%.
Yeah, sorry, there was a little lag here. No.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so the first step was we need to get visibility over how people are performing.
Just a quick question on that. Sorry,
Yeah.
Marie, just to kind of dive in. I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? They'd kind of grown to that size and were then kind of almost thinking, how do we really focus in on what performance is? And I mean, it's, in my experience, that's not an uncommon kind of milestone to hit, right? Because when you're rapidly scaling from like 2 or 3 up to 10, 15, 20, 25, you just need to get stuff done. And that is really the thing that you're focusing on. It's not really around kind of performance metrics per se. It's more like, to your point, impact, outcomes. Are we growing? But it's interesting that kind of stark realization of, okay, we need to measure performance now. How do we do that? And obviously it becomes really intrinsically important because it's linked to the possibility of generating the next funding round.
And
You
it
need
is
to kind of
also
demonstrate these things.
Yeah, exactly. And it is also it's a normal challenge at that stage of the growth curve, right? At the beginning of you create your startup and you're trying to find product market fit, you're starting to build the product that you're going to sell to then grow revenue, right? And in order to do that, everyone needs to wear multiple hats and have flexibility and do what needs to be done, and the get shit done mentality works. But once you've found product market fit, you need to start to systemize and make your processes and your results repeatable. Otherwise, your investors are going to be like, we can't have the level of trust that we need to invest more funds because we need return on investment. So it's a challenge, but it's also a very normal challenge for when you hit that stage of growth. And so yeah, that we'd hit that stage of growth.
Marie, what I really love what you said is in the beginning, what is the right problem, or how do we know that we solve the right problem? Any insights on when people listen to this podcast, right? Say, how do I figure this out? What my problem is at the moment? You already explained it super nicely with the company that especially what you just said, like if you get shit done and then you achieve this product market fit and then you need to scale it, then this is why performance is a topic. But could you get maybe or share a little bit about how you find out what the right problem is when you get started? Were there any indicators where you said, look, this helped us to understand that exactly this is the problem? Because people might ask, like, so they haven't performed before, or was that not relevant, or like, why is this now a topic? Yeah.
Yes. So it starts with, what is your business trying to achieve, right? So for that sort of stage of growth, it might be no churn and sustainable, growth for revenue. So because it's not just about growing revenue, but you're losing the clients from last year and you've got twice as many clients this year. You have to have a stable, reliable base that you continuously scale. And so looking at your business goals, then your exec team is going to come together and define department goals that are going to feed into that business goal and be directly connected to it. And then from there, as a department, you're going to define, what do we need to do to feed into this? Whether it's the V2MOM or OKR framework doesn't matter as much as there needs to be a direct correlation on what are the metrics that we're trying to move the needle on. And then you take your best guess at what type of work, what type of initiatives are going to feed into this and move the needle in a meaningful way. And if the initiatives don't work, then you can pivot and you can do something else and try to see if that moves the needle. But the metrics are what you need to make a difference on to reach the business goals. And when we're in the people sphere, there's 3 sort of pillars that feed into business goals. There's the business success, of course. There's the employee success, and then there's the PX team success, that of your own team. And oftentimes we hyper focus on employee success. So it is important, but it's one of three. It's not 100% of the equation. And what I mean by employee success is the employee journey. So how do we hire? How do we onboard, drive performance? And again, like that's what we're going to talk about in the podcast. So it is relevant, but we cannot overlook the PX team success and business success. So the idea of the PX team success is just get your own shit together first. It's a hygiene factor. Like if you accumulate HR debt, which is a concept that Jubi Yao speaks about beautifully in her blog, if you accumulate, which is the same as tech debt, right? It's let's do things dirty now and we'll pay the ticket later. Some things are worth paying the ticket later. Some things you actually want to automate and scale now. Otherwise, you're going to end up doing the work manually tomorrow. And you'll have less time for strategic work. A typical example is when we arrived at Bob, it would take over 5 business days. It would take weeks with an S from offer made to contract signed. Wow. And one of the first initiatives that our VP and People Ops team focused on was how do we scale, how do we automate this for scale so that the People Ops team, then can focus the energy elsewhere and have a more strategic impact. So how do we get our hygiene factors in a good enough place that we don't end up just being constantly overwhelmed, running after our own tails? And they, through automation, integrations, things like hooking up our ATS to a contract platform, and then having templates in that platform that would be auto-filled by the ATS information, and then connect that to our HRIS system. In the end, it was taking like an hour, because it was more about reviewing the information than about manually going into systems and doing the input and then doing the reviewing, but probably by another person, because if you're already deep in the work, then at some point the letters will start to blur together. So that's what I mean by getting your own shit together first. Or in a softer way, it would be putting your own oxygen mask on first, so that you can then, have the energy to give your support elsewhere. And of course, that depending on your capacity, that might happen in parallel to other strings of work, but that is it. Hygiene needs to be a priority. If you want to free up some of your time for strategic impact and having an impact on the business goals long term.
I love that. Sorry, Matthias, you were going to jump in.
No. This is perfect, because I think, based on that question, solving the right problem, you very nicely explained how do you fix this, right? And I think we heard it here in this podcast already. We are very biased as people to only focus on people's success and keep on forgetting about the business success or even the success of your own team, right? I think I don't want to start with a provocative statement, but our profession sometimes suffers also from people who are out there that, are great on stages, are great on talks, but they don't know the basics and don't master the basics, and they don't get their own shit together, right? And I think this is something that is important when you want to drive change. First, start with operational excellence, get your shit together, and then really start creating value around you with people, but also with the business, right? And it's if the house is on fire, never good.
I think there's also a quite a natural human behavior where we just overlook the bookends. If we look at the design cycle, defining the problem sometimes is easy to skip and jump to solutions, and embedding the work that we designed is sometimes easy to skip. We're like, here it is, goodbye, I'm working on something else now. And the same happens with that funnel where you've got business success and then your own team success, and they're the bookends. So they're easy to overlook as part of just how our brains function as the human creatures that we are.
Marie, I love the way you kind of reframed And it touches on what kind of Matthias said there as well, in so much as sometimes there's a danger that as people, we feel we're there at the service of the business to react to the business need. Whereas what you're framing there is, well, actually, you're there to drive the business impact, and identify business needs. So therefore, you do, as a team, as a PX team, do need to have your kind of house in order to be able to do that, and kind of ensure that you've got that kind of foundational element as a team to be able to do more impactful work. So yeah, I love the framing of that, because again, to Matthias's point, is like, when we've got to move away from this mentality of being there, reacting and serving the business as part of the element of what we do from maybe a kind of logistical HR perspective. But actually, we're there to really drive impact and amplify that kind of people experience. Yeah, love that indeed.
Well, we're the only other function with the senior leadership teams that has a cross-functional view of the entire business and can look at it as a system, as a living organism. So it's a privileged perspective that I think we can leverage to really drive revenue growth.
Yeah, 100%. One thing I was curious just to ask, when you were to kind of do, and maybe I'm jumping ahead here, so maybe just push back on this one if I'm jumping ahead, but where you started to kind of review performance at Learnably, I wonder if you started to identify individuals that were probably in roles where they were performing, but you could get more performance out of them, or there were individuals in roles that probably weren't performing to the level and expectation that you need going forward. So it was almost like, kind of square peg, round hole type thing. You were starting to like, oh, okay, so these people have been doing really well for us, but actually going forward, they might not fit as well as we think they do.
I want to make sure that I answer this properly. Could you?
Let me give you an example. Yeah. Let me give you an example. So you know what it's like from 2 to 10 to 20. People are kind of Swiss Army knives in their roles. They're doing loads of stuff. They're probably, their roles are bleeding into other people's roles. So you might have somebody who's like technically head of development, but actually head of development for that business at Series A or Series B or Series C funding is very different to what head of, kind of biz dev or development is at Series A. So now you're starting to kind of map either the gaps between kind of performance needed now and performance needed in the future.
So I think there's multiple conversations that this could go into. One is just job titles in startups, and
yes, exactly.
And how much there's a correlation between your role in terms of having a leveling framework and knowing the capabilities and the expectations at that level, and the job title. There's a conversation about just as an organization, how do we build a view of that so we have shared language and we can start having those conversations and start seeing where the gaps are, which is the project that we did at Learnably, because you can't have that conversation until you have shared language. You can only make guesses and assumptions, but to do it in a sustainable way and make sure you've got the right people in the right role with the right capabilities. Before even looking at how people are performing in their roles, you need to know what roles do we need. Forget about the people, just in terms of pure capabilities. To be able to have that conversation, you need to understand what capabilities are and what they look like at different levels. And then from there, you can start mapping out how are people performing, how are they delivering, based on the business objectives, looking at the capabilities and the type of impact that we'd expect from someone in that role.
Yeah, 100%. You answered that really well from a poorly articulated question from me. you brought it back and gave it some semblance of sense and structure. So thank you.
They're super meaty questions, and that's why it's so important and they're complex topics. And that's why it's super important to first know what problem are we trying to solve, because otherwise it's so easy to take something complex and make it complicated. And the difference between the two is complex is a challenge with ramifications. It branches out, but complicated is like a massive knot and you can't see the tree from the wood or the wood from the tree. So to sort of circle back almost to the conversation we were having about identifying the right problem, I recently went to Juby's Step Up Bootcamp, where it's all about, stepping up, not away, but beyond of being a functional leader and into being a business leader. And she shared, the reason why I'm mentioning this is she shared this super helpful framework for identifying problems that she called the big picture. And the idea is it's PIC. What problem are you trying to solve? Being very specific. Who is experiencing the problem? What is happening? When is it occurring? And where is it happening? And just being very specific, because it's so easy when we look at problems to make a generic statement, and then if it's generic, it's harder to tie everything back neatly, and you can easily get lost in translation as well. So very precisely defining the problem, then evidencing the impact of the problem with qualitative and quantitative data. And that's a step that we can also very easily skip because of our own biases. And it's not an HR thing, it's a human thing. It's thinking, well, I know this, therefore it is truth. And maybe it's truth, but also maybe it's not. And maybe you're right, and it's not the top priority problem to solve, because the impact of that problem that you're finding the evidence on is less than this other problem that you've also identified, and you can only do one of them because there's only so much time and capability and capacity that you have. And ultimately, strategy is about making choices of what you're going to let burn. So so articulating the impact of the problem is very important, so that you can then prioritize properly to deliver against business goals. And through work that's going to impact the people experience, don't get me wrong, I'm saying the word business a lot, but it's got to do still with the people experience. But they have to be in a symbiotic relationship. You can't favor the other over the other. And then once you've got the impact, it's looking at, okay, so what are the causes? Because once we know what the cause is of that problem, from there we can sort of make our best guesses at what type of work is going to have an impact, and change that or solve that problem. And this is a classic product tool. It's just the 5 whys, just asking why, and then asking why again to dig deeper until you get to the root cause of things.
Marie, I love what you just said, also with the quantitative and qualitative analysis or data points, and especially with the biases that we have. Also, as let's go with the term people today. Yeah. So in your experience, Marie, like, what data should people look at to understand what kind of problems they need to fix? From your experience, I mean, we started off with performance, right? And performance is probably when you start fresh from a green field, you don't have any data, no surprise, right? But how do you design that journey when you start building up the performance management to figure out, where do I want to go? Like, what is the best practice, and how do I make sure that I hit my targets when I design this going forward? Like, based on your experience, how would you recommend this to people when they start trying to identify that?
I want to jump in just before that question, because I think this segues neatly in. It's like, what is valuable data when it comes to people?
Ooh.
I mean, what is valuable? Kind of, if you were kind of like, on the projects you've been on, what is valuable data? Because Matthias, we were chatting about it yesterday, right? if you're a big enough company, you've got an ATS, right? So you've got data in the ATS. Don't mean to say it's valuable data. Don't mean to say it's usable data. So I guess it's almost like what would be the ideal starting point in terms of valuable data, Marie? What do you think?
It depends.
Yeah, I
And
totally
this is
get
not a
that.
cop
Yeah.
out. I'm going to give you examples.
Yeah, cool.
Well, qualitative, it may be qualitative is it's going to be some form of feedback, right? So it may be your founder or your executive team self-reporting that they lack visibility and or have been lenient on performance challenges or haven't had the conversations with the people they think they need to have conversations with because they lack that shared language. Sometimes it's out of fear, this is a difficult conversation and the ego is getting in the way, but also sometimes it's just I can't articulate this in a fair way because we don't have shared language around what are the capabilities in this role and how does it tie to the impact that we expect said role to have on the business. So that's one thing. From an employee perspective, it could be the engagement driver of I have clarity of what is expected in my role. I am confident of how I am performing because I've had XYZ conversations with my manager. So that's also self-reported. It could be people coming to HR and saying like, I think this person's not performing in their role, and then the people partner saying back something like, have you had a chance to have a conversation with this person about what is expected in their role in the first place? And then the person answering, well, no, and that would be hard to articulate. So that's ideas on qualitative. And then on quantitative, revenue figures don't lie, for one. That's a sentence by Lauren Gomez. I gotta give her credit for it. It's a very beautiful and sharp sentence. I didn't come up with it. And also, when you review the leveling of your organization, you might identify, gaps, or looking at your org chart. If the right roles are not all in the right place, then you're bound to have some gaps in how your current org chart is operating. So that's another thing
Yeah,
to look at.
I think I also want to ping that question to Matthias as well. What is valuable data, my friend?
What did I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, you didn't miss anything. It's interesting to kind of get that kind of comparison, right? Because both of you are kind of in this on a day-to-day basis. You've had this kind of operational experience, and I want to spin back on that kind of ATS conversation, because it was just kind of like, we can all we've got a host of data here. Okay, what parts of it are valuable?
Yeah. Look, I will not go down the ATS road so much, but since we talk about the revenue, I love this term. Yeah, revenue numbers don't lie. My first immediate thought was, okay, then revenue per employee should be then the number one people metric in every people team. And why do so many people don't do this, right? So I think that's something. And so to have really a little bit of fun, I'm trying to introduce this now on my team. Guess who is the best performing company with revenue per employee? Do you have a guess, Marie or Glenn? You all know the company, by the way, but you will never guess it.
That means it's not an immediately obvious company, because you might go for like a Google or a Facebook or a kind of like an Amazon or something along those lines. It's got to be a high street brand. Is it a high street brand? Is it like a product?
Is it a solopreneur that scaled their revenue with AI?
So look, not that this comes too edgy now, but OnlyFans has 42 employees and has a revenue per employee of 30 million. Revenue per employee, 30 million. So of course, if users are generating your revenue growth, it's a damn good business model, right? And I I actually shared this with new starters in the onboarding. I said, look, you're gonna see a company because they were like, oh, revenue per employee, who is like best performing in class, and so like I'm not gonna say the name, but I will share this later with you, and you're gonna have a laugh because you don't have this on your mind, right? There are 42 people, and then if you calculate this by 30 million, right, you kind of get an idea of where this is going. But it's a marketplace, right? So somebody is there and provides services, and others pay for it. But you don't need salespeople. You barely probably need customer success people. You just need to maintain the platform and maybe develop features and have a certain security and stability and some payment processes behind it. But that's pretty much it. Yeah. And who would have thought? I did not, but when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, 30 million. Yeah. So, serious note on revenue per employee. I think when I go into my LinkedIn bubble and I see people talking about this, then everybody is like, yeah, but this is not the silver bullet, Matthias. And what can you identify with this, etc., etc. But I think, honestly speaking, it tells you from a people perspective a lot about if this number is too high based on the benchmarks, especially in the different growth areas of companies, right? It tells you maybe we have too many people in order to actually hit the numbers. And this is then an efficiency problem or a collaboration problem or a process problem, right? So do I need, for example, a certain amount of people? How many people do I need when and which stage, right? There are a lot of benchmarks and org design benchmarks around this, but I do think this is the right question to go talk to your executives to say, look, based on the amount of people, we should actually be somewhere here. We are not here. So what is the problem? Yeah. Why are we not there? Right. So I think this would be on the KPI side, something I would take as a great starting point because executives get it, right? Every executive would get this number and would say, okay, let's deep dive on certain areas. I think then another thing that I would look at is I think you need to have the right KPIs. And I think there's a long conversation around this. For example, TA or especially talent people, they suffered a lot from efficiencies. They're so obsessed about efficiencies. They'll be like, yeah, look, I can move this person from A to B within 5 days, 3 days, 1 day, 24 hours. And you'd be like, yeah, well done. But like, what is the quality of that person? Yeah. And so if you do not deliver a quality output, it seems of a quality per hire, then I do not care how fast you are, because if it's not real value that I get, I don't mind how fast it is, right? I rather have it slower, but then we are quite sure that we create the best experience, or we create a proper assessment in order to be sure that we don't do this mistake twice in terms of hiring. And so I think what I'm trying to say here is we need to look into the KPIs that we use, because just because it's a KPI, it doesn't mean that we are set up for success. We need to really think about what is the value that we create and then design the right KPIs in order to measure this success. And that's why a lot of recruiters and talent people, they set up for failure because they look at time to hire, time to fill, conversion rates between stages. If this is really your value add that you create to the business, to be very efficient and fast in something without actually looking at the output and the add value that you create with the hires you make, I'm sorry, then I think AI will replace you.
Yeah, I think 100% true. And this piece around kind of certainly data sources, and back to you, Marie, in terms of qualitative data sources and how to really creatively use it. You had a project of Bob, which I thought, when I heard when you said there's a kind of message, I was just like, this is wicked. Love this. So just kind of set it up. Because this is actually really powerful. Set it up. Set the scene for us.
So the problem that we were trying to solve was we did not have, it was at Bob, we did not have clean employee data, and we needed to put automations in place to free up the time of the HR team. So we needed our hygiene, that's what we talked about earlier. We needed it to be clean and automated so that we could free up the time of the HR team and have the data that we need to operate as well. And the impact that was having on the business and on our people is, well, a lot of processes were manual because we couldn't automate what we wanted with our old HRIS, and we were having employee complaints, a lot of questions. Can we do this in the old HRIS? Answer is no. And frustration, and people spending more time on booking time off than really should be necessary with manual steps and so on. So that's how we identified that this was a priority problem to solve, and decided to switch HRIS and went with HiBob. Which is relevant also for the rest of the project. It's not just like product based. There are a good product.
Yeah.
I'm not getting paid to say this.
Yet.
Well, marketing team at HiBob, if you see this. Okay, so what we did is brought the user feedback to life. And I have to say the name of the person in my team who owned this project. Her name is Jennifer Campbell, and she's wonderful. And so how it went is the people ops team was working on transferring all the information that we had into the new system and doing the back-end work. And then for how we were going to launch that new HRIS, we knew that we wanted it to be as seamless and painless as possible. HRIS is usually not associated to fun or I want to complete my profile. Well, it's not. It's admin, right? I don't know if we're as phobic.
100% true. I mean, I don't think I've ever been in any business where people have gone, "Wow, we're getting a new HRIS system. I'm super excited."
It's hygiene. No one,
Exactly.
No one's heart sings for that. So we planted a mole, and a fake employee called hang in there. It's gonna make sense soon. A fake employee called Bob Toole, Pule, who was actually Jen, with a picture of her partner who had, GDPR was safe, he had accepted.
Yeah.
And Bob had a real team, a real manager, and joined and started asking questions about our HRIS in a bunch of different channels. All of these questions were actually real employee feedback from across the past year, except we'd rephrased and condensed it into a week's worth of guerrilla marketing. So it started with, the chat of the all hands, and then some Slack channels, and then some Slack channels that are usually only used to talk about the game. And then it culminated in an email to all, like, who does this? No one, but Bob did it. And the email said something along the lines of, well, my name is Bob Toole, so Tools is my thing. I'm a data analyst. I joined on Monday, and have we looked at this HRIS thing? Because it's really painful. And it really started people talking. People were asking, who is this person? Can we help him settle in? Like, why is he so hung up on the HRIS? Some leaders were like, what's up with your hiring process? and we quickly released the tension, and Jen hopped on the team-wide, company-wide all hands call on the Monday and explained that actually I was Bob, I am Bob, and that feedback is those questions, those pains, they're all yours.
Amazing.
And to solve this problem, we're switching HRIS. And here are all the wonderful things that this is going to solve for, in that It's going to make your day-to-day better. And from there, she did a gamification. I've never seen people be so much in love with merch as I have in that company. And so she did cross-departmental teams that were competing for, special lines of backpacks. And we ultimately had 90% of accurate employee data in that new HRIS system within 48 hours. Missing entries were mostly people on holiday. And in the old system, we were missing a lot of information. And that meant that our people ops team could then, create like processes that would be automated on the back of that information, give a lot of self-served opportunities. People could edit things themselves, and so on and so forth. And that's how
Love that.
went about the Bob project.
Love
And the
that.
best thing about it is you don't have like these creative ideas. You don't always have to come up with them. This had actually been done before by the team of a mentor, Juby, that I've mentioned earlier. She did this in a previous role and had written a case study about it that's on the HiBob website. So, Jen interviewed her and we did it in-house, and we tailored it to the challenges that we were facing and to our employees' tone of voice and so on and so forth. But it was completely feasible, and it worked, and it delivered. And not just one caveat that I want to share here. When you're doing creative work like this, experiential work, you're always playing with the limit of, what's going to grab people's attention and what's going to potentially throw them off. And they're going to be like, oh, some people came to us and were, oh, you're supposed to be the trustworthy ones and you just tricked us. That's a little bit weird. And that's, valid and understandable. And we had very interesting feedback conversations of the back of that. And it's a risk that we were comfortable taking. So you have to be also honest with yourself of what is fit for purpose in your business and what's going to land enough that you're willing to take the risk, because ultimately one detractor has influence over 10 other, and that could be on Trustpilot. It's not an HR thing, but one detractor is going to spread their concerns to an average of 10 other people. So you need to weigh the risk versus reward balance in a way that is really in line with what you need to achieve and where you are.
That's so cool. I love that. I love the kind of risk and reward element of it, simply because, to your point, right? When I think about that, if I was per se talking to a detractor, I could quite comfortably discuss with them, well, the fact that you've updated all your information, your HRIS, these are the kind of statistics of essentially what you would lose out on or potentially not gain by not having your information in there. So the fact that we've kind of encouraged you through a bit of gamification to do that is net benefit for you. I don't think it's necessarily I think if they leverage too much on the trust, I think they're probably looking at the wrong part of that. I mean, it's kind of almost like, it's almost like perhaps their frame of reference is not quite kind of right there. Matthias, you were going to say? I could see you itching.
It depends, right? Again, because different cultures, different experience, different people teams before, right? So I would not, when you said this, the first thing that came to my mind is we listen, we don't judge, right?
Yeah.
So here in this regard is like, if people have trust issues with the people team, because maybe the people team didn't do such a good job in the past. And then when you come in, you always need to be like, what is the status quo? What is the appetite of risk? What is the appetite of disruption? What is the appetite of change, right? And in some areas, people might say, right now, this is great that you have all the solutions for our problems, but please calm down a bit, because we don't need so much disruption in this space for some time now. which is a fair play, right? So I think this is why you need to be a bit more mindful, but again, about solving the right problem. It is the context of the organization and the appetite of leadership and what has happened in the past, right? Just imagine you would have an organization that let go of 50% of their staff. I mean, trust will be a big topic, no matter what. So I would be careful with that then, but it totally makes
100%.
sense, right? Yeah.
Word of caution. And we did have conversations with people who are uncomfortable with what happened, and we learned so much through that feedback. It was really it was really valuable.
100% agree. 100%.
Yeah, I think for me again, I understand where you're coming from, Matthias, in terms of the appetite for kind of disruption and change, etc. But surely we're there to move the needle. There's got to be, there's got to be some challenge to that kind of appetite sometimes. And I get your point around kind of like mass redundancies. I mean, ultimately, you come into an environment like that, change and or disruption is not going to be a particularly healthy thing. It's actually going to probably be more detrimental.
It's the risk and reward, and it's going to depend on the context of your business.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's worth it, and sometimes it's just not.
Yeah.
And I also be mindful of, like, if you talk about the different steps of organizational growth, right, and the investments and so on, how many times have we seen a Series A versus Series B versus Series C, let alone this change, this positive change, actually, of, making something big and scale and successful, is already nerve-wracking for a lot of people, because they are in love with Series A, but they don't want to actually be Series B, but they also don't want to change their job. And why would they now even change the way they work, right? So I think this is something that can become quite complex, and has become really complex because the money was quite high that was invested in the past in companies, right? A 50 million here, a 70 million there, 100 million there. That puts pressure on a lot of people to return results quickly, which means that the employee per se has no other choice than to adjust, commit, maybe somehow disagree, but it's an either or situation.
It's a really interesting point I think you've provoked here, Marie, because like I say, it's kind of, I'm sitting in the camp where I'm like, I love what you did there. And I'm like I say, risk and reward, I'm happy. I would be happy with that, because obviously you've gone through that kind of almost like matrix of, or risk matrix in terms of what are the potential positive and or negative kind of outcomes here. And yeah, but I can still see the overall kind of benefit. You know what I mean?
I'll take it.
Yeah, 100%. Well, just to kind of wrap up, and we were kind of touching upon, obviously people experience, employee experience. What about people's experience outside of the business? And when you came onto the call, you discussed, and if you don't mind sharing, it's just kind of like a really positive experience you had, just in terms of kind of talking about kind of consulting and employment opportunities. And actually you kind of came on buzzing after a call where perhaps the outcome is not decided yet, but actually from your point of view, you'd be like,
what is decided? Decided, yeah.
It's a really kind of valuable kind of interaction. Are you kind of happy to share that? Because I thought that was just super cool. You came on so buzzed about it.
And I feel like after that, I owe your audience, our audience, for today, the performance breakdown at Learnably, because we still haven't covered that topic, and we promised it very early on in the call. So I wouldn't want to leave anyone resentful.
Well, let's go there first, and then let's round off with your personal story, because I think that would be really, really nice way to close.
Okay, sounds good. So let me just pick up where we left it. So we defined that we needed visibility over performance in order to then drive performance through conversations. Ultimately, if you boil performance down to one thing, it's two people in a room having the right conversation. That's going to leave the person with clarity over what's expected and over what good looks like in terms of impact, and leave them energized to go on and do that thing. But you need a lot of infrastructure to get there. first off, you need to know like what roles do we need, and how do we know what roles we need? Like what is a role made of in terms of levels, in terms of capabilities, in terms of the behaviors that we expect from people. And so knowing we needed visibility to drive performance, the design was on how do we give people clear shared language so everyone has clear expectations in those terms: levels, capabilities, behaviors. So the work that we did was around, and all of this is open sourced, by the way, be it the leadership pitch decks, the launch decks, the manager training decks, the end product for the employees over like the Notion pages with what is our career framework, and so on and so forth. So all of that is open sourced. So revamping the values so that, because values translate into very clear behaviors over how we're expecting everyone to show up across the company. And then capabilities, so in terms of the technical skills, what is expected in what role. Leveling is it's part of the career framework. How do capabilities translate to specific levels of seniority? And that's the work that happened. In terms of design, then how we operate was with the classic sort of product methodologies. That is also something that we built an agile HR project toolbox at Barb that we also open sourced. So for anyone who wants to get into the detail of what is a stand-up and how do we tend to structure it, and how do you size and scope your work, and how do you then do a retro to learn and do better, faster next time, so on and so forth. That's also open sourced. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm not going to dive deep into those details unless you put me.
Well, we can put the links to those when we kind of release. So yeah, that's cool. That'd be amazing.
And in terms of delivery, the first thing that Lauren, as our head of people, did was bring all the leadership team in a room together and do a no strings attached calibration conversation. And that's very uncomfortable, because as HR people, we're like, well, but like, what about if someone's underperforming? You're not going to have you're just going to let that burn, not going to have a conversation with them? And how do you want to have the perfect conversation if you don't have the shared language yet, and so on and so forth? But here's the thing. If you want people to run a marathon in 6 months, you need to have them start running to the end of the street and back and start building those muscles. And it needs to be in a safe space that you feel comfortable enough to practice with each other. And so that's why some of the first steps that we took in terms of delivery were no impact calibration conversations, just opening up about performance, but also training with the managers, leveraging a wonderful company called The Communication Practice with actors who would role play scenarios, and managers would also have a safe environment where they could practice those conversations. And then the backbone of that was also ritualizing across the employee experience, touch points and rituals, feedback practices, so praise and other sort of, in Leapsum you've got a bunch of feedback modules, whether it's praise or feedback cycles and so on. Building feedback as part of the one-to-one conversation guidance that we give, for example, and embedding it across the entire employee journey, anchoring it in the building blocks that I talked about earlier: career framework, values, and so on.
Brilliant.
And launching then our performance process as the minimum viable version that it could be, with a few questions. Inspired also by how they did it at Netflix. They had, I think, even more, it's a lot of context and then questions that spark the right conversations, and the reflective questions that they'd share with managers. I don't remember all three, but one that we definitely also leveraged was, if this person left tomorrow, how would you feel about it, from relieved to completely distressed. And that's not something it's a reflective question for the manager, and it's alongside a lot of guidance and practices on how to have these conversations, and guidance also for the employees on how to prepare these conversations and how to articulate the impact that you have had, so that everyone can have a constructive conversations and come prepared.
Very cool.
And yeah, through all that work, the result was that our ultimate goal was that performance was not a taboo, and it would be part of one-to-one conversations, at least on a monthly basis. And we saw an increase in feedback across the entire company of 55% quarter on quarter in less than a year.
Amazing. What a great outcome. What a really, really great outcome. That's fantastic. I think, again, Marie, just kind of circling back on this, you've given us two kind of case studies there, real kind of workable case studies where, you're signposting towards what qualitative and quantitative data sources could look like to really help build out these kind of PX projects. So I think it's really valuable.
And I want to caveat, I caveat everything today apparently, but I want to caveat the performance work that we did. The head of people that I was reporting into, Lauren Gomez, she had already done it before. So she had a very clear vision and helped me understand what the building blocks were and how they connected together. And that is a huge part of why we're able to move so quickly. It's not just the methodology. The methodology, of course, supercharges what you can deliver and how much time and how it's going to land with your audience, because you work hand in hand and it connects to business impact, and you can articulate why you're doing that work. And that's sort of a key piece of your change management. But having done it before, and also tapping into other work that's been open sourced, and having mentors to guide, like all of these things are part of what enabled us to really move at pace.
Amazing.
We were also our people team was 8%, if I remember correctly, of the overall headcount. So we had the investment. Its context also allowed us to move fast. It's
Brilliant.
not to be expected that anyone could prioritize this in that kind of time frame, unless, of course, because as we said earlier, strategy is about choosing what you let burn. You choose to let burn the rest and focus on that only until it's done. But it's about concessions in context. So caveat.
Great. Matthias, closing thoughts?
I really enjoyed the conversation. Especially, I'm kind of reflecting a little bit about the hour that we had. And I think my three takeaways are, first of all, what is the right problem to solve, right? This is definitely key for everyone. Then what you just said, Marie, right? Strategy is about choices, what you let burn. I think this is a very powerful statement. And last but not least, I think what you also said, which was it? You need to look at revenue doesn't lie, or the revenue numbers don't lie, right? So I think these are the three takeaways from this conversation, which I can say that's definitely a key takeaway for everyone in our profession to really focus and nail this, to actually create value, right, in the end of the day. And I think that's really well done. Thank you, Marie.
Yeah.
You're most welcome. And sorry, just if you enjoyed those takeaways, one is a quote by Lauren Gomez, check her out, and one is a quote by Juby Yao, check her out. They're brilliant.
And don't forget to check out Marie Krebs as well, right? So come on. Yeah. But genuinely, this has been a super, super valuable and interesting conversation, Marie. I think a couple of takeaways for me, that kind of whole phrase around put your own oxygen mask on first. I think the reframing of how we think about kind of the people experience team and just the overall people team in terms of genuinely reframing that kind of mindset into delivering business impact and outcomes, as opposed to kind of being a service to the business. And then the two kind of projects that you've outlined at Learnably and Barb, and just in terms of, one, focusing on performance and some of the challenges that companies and people teams will face in relation to that. But equally, I love the risk and reward, really thinking about how can we do these things kind of differently and using qualitative data that you've taken from the actual employees and holding up as a mirror to them. These are the things that you said you wanted. And I love that because, yes, I take your point in terms of the elements of risk in it, but I just really can see the value of the outcomes. And to your point, I would 100 every time take the risk because the reward and the outcomes I think are super valuable. But Marie, thank you so much for being an incredible guest on Escaping the Echo Chamber podcast. It's been a real pleasure. You've been amazing.
Thanks. Just on what you said about risk. There's an engineering manager, an engineering leader that I used to work with. And something that he said about people experiencing taking risk when I asked him for feedback about a project that we were working on, he said, when you're innovating and you're pioneering, you're on the bleeding edge. Is that an English saying? Yeah, you're on the bleeding edge of things, and that means sometimes you're bound to bleed a little. And as long as you acknowledge that, and if it hurts, you apologize and you pivot and you iterate and you do things differently next time, and you share a plaster, then that's part of the process as well.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Mic drop moment right there. Great way to end. Thanks again, Marie. Super.
Thank you so much.